What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors walks into what he thinks is a standard promotional interview, only to find himself facing a host who seems determined to embarrass him on national television? Tonight we're diving into the explosive confrontation that left Harrison Ford storming off the Jimmy Kimmel live set. And trust me, by the end of this story, you'll see Jimmy Kimmel in a completely different light. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below because this story gets wild fast. The studio lights were blazing hot that evening as Harrison Ford settled into the guest chair across from Jimmy Kimmel. Ford had been making the rounds promoting his latest project, and this was supposed to be just another friendly late-night chat. The audience was buzzing with excitement, phones already recording, expecting the usual banter between a beloved movie star and America's supposed sweetheart of late-night television. "Harrison Ford, everybody," Kimmel announced with his trademark grin. But there was something different in his eyes tonight, something that Ford would soon recognize as calculated malice. "So Harrison, I have to ask, and forgive me if this sounds rude, but at your age, don't you think it's time to hang up the fedora and let someone younger take over Indiana Jones?" The question hit the studio like a cold slap. Ford's expression barely changed, but those who knew him could see the slight tightening around his eyes. The audience shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to laugh or cringe. "Well, Jimmy," Ford replied in his measured tone, "I think the fans and the box office numbers would disagree with that assessment. Age brings experience, something that's pretty valuable in this business." Kimmel leaned forward, his smile never wavering but growing somehow sharper. "Right. But let's be honest here. You've been playing the same character for what, 40 years now? Some might say you're just coasting on nostalgia at this point." The camera caught Ford's jaw clench slightly. This wasn't the playful ribbing that usually characterized late-night interviews. This felt personal, deliberate. Ford had been in Hollywood long enough to recognize when someone was trying to make him look foolish for entertainment value. "I think my body of work speaks for itself," Ford said carefully. "I've always tried to bring something new to every role, whether it's Indiana Jones, Han Solo, or any other character I've played." "Han Solo," Kimmel pounced on the reference. "Now there's an interesting topic. Word is you actually wanted them to kill off Han Solo years ago because you were tired of the character. Sounds like someone who really loves his craft, right?" The audience was dead silent now. Even the most casual viewer could sense the tension building between the two men. Ford's publicist, sitting in the wings, was frantically gesturing to the show's producers, but Kimmel seemed oblivious to everyone except his target. "That's not exactly accurate," Ford replied, his voice still calm but with an edge creeping in. "My discussions with the filmmakers were about story arc and character development. It's called having creative input, something I thought would be respected in a professional setting." Kimmel chuckled, but it was a cold sound. "Creative input, sure. Or maybe it was just wanting out of a commitment you regretted making. I mean, let's face it, the new Star Wars movies weren't exactly critical darlings, were they? I think millions of fans around the world would disagree with that characterization," Ford said, his patience clearly wearing thin. "The films were successful both critically and commercially." "Were they, though?" Kimmel pressed, pulling out what appeared to be printed reviews. "Because I have some reviews here that say otherwise. Should I read a few of the more colorful ones?" Ford stared at his host for a long moment, and something shifted in the air between them. The veteran actor had faced down countless interviews, hostile journalists, and even difficult directors. But this felt different. This felt like a deliberate attempt at public humiliation disguised as entertainment. "You know what, Jimmy," Ford said, his voice taking on that dangerous quiet tone that anyone who had worked with him recognized as a warning. "I came here tonight to talk about my new project and to connect with the audience. If you want to read bad reviews on television, maybe you should start with some of the ones about this show." The audience gasped audibly. Kimmel's smile finally faltered for just a second before snapping back into place, but now it looked more like a grimace. "Oh, that's good," Kimmel said, trying to regain control of the situation with forced laughter. Harrison Ford, ladies and gentlemen, bringing the Hollywood charm we all know and love. Tell me, is this the same attitude you brought to the set when directors were trying to get you to show some emotion in your performances? That was the line. Ford's eyes went stone cold, and everyone in the studio knew they had just witnessed something cross over from uncomfortable television into something much more serious. "I think we need to clarify something here," Ford said, his voice now carrying the full weight of his decades in the industry. "Are you interviewing me, or are you trying to roast me? Because if it's the latter, you should probably let your guests know ahead of time so they can decide whether they want to participate in your little game." Kimmel's mask was slipping now, his true intentions becoming clearer with each exchange. "Hey, I'm just asking the questions that everyone wants to know. Isn't that what good television is about? Getting to the truth?" "The truth?" Ford repeated, and there was something almost dangerous in his tone now. "You want to talk about truth? Let's talk about the truth of a host who invites guests onto his show under false pretenses and then tries to embarrass them for cheap laughs." The studio fell into an uncomfortable silence as Ford's words hung in the air. Kimmel's production team was now visibly scrambling behind the cameras, but their host seemed determined to push forward with his aggressive line of questioning, apparently convinced he could break down one of Hollywood's most respected figures on live television. "Wow, sensitive much?" Kimmel shot back, trying to play off Ford's legitimate criticism as oversensitivity. "I mean, come on, Harrison, you've been in this business long enough to handle a few tough questions, right? Or is this the famous Harrison Ford temper we've all heard stories about?" Ford's expression didn't change, but something cold and calculating entered his eyes. "Famous temper? What stories would those be, exactly? Because I think you might be confusing me with someone else, or maybe you're just making things up as you go along." "Oh, I'm not making anything up," Kimmel said, clearly enjoying what he perceived as getting under Ford's skin. "I've heard from people in the industry that you can be, let's say, difficult to work with, demanding, hard to please. Some might even say impossible." The audience was completely silent now, sensing they were witnessing something that had gone far beyond normal television boundaries. Ford leaned back in his chair, studying his host with the kind of intense focus he usually reserved for his most challenging roles. "People in the industry," Ford repeated slowly. "That's interesting. Which people exactly? Because I've worked with hundreds of directors, producers, and actors over the years, and I'd be curious to know which ones you've been talking to." Kimmel's confidence wavered slightly. He had clearly expected Ford to either get flustered or angry, not to calmly call him out on his tactics. "Well, I can't reveal my sources, you understand. Professional courtesy and all that." "Professional courtesy," Ford said, and there was something almost amused in his tone now, though not in a pleasant way. "That's rich, coming from someone who invited me here under the pretense of a normal interview and is now trying to ambush me with anonymous gossip and manufactured controversy." "I'm just doing my job," Kimmel protested, but his voice had lost some of its earlier smugness. "Asking the hard questions, getting to the real story behind the Hollywood facade." "Your job," Ford said, his voice getting quieter and somehow more menacing, "is supposed to be entertaining your audience, not humiliating your guests. But I'm starting to think maybe you've forgotten the difference between entertainment and bullying." The word bullying hit the studio like a thunderclap. Kimmel's face flushed red, and for the first time since the interview began, he looked genuinely rattled. "Bullying? That's pretty dramatic language for someone who's supposedly tough enough to do his own stunts." "There's nothing dramatic about calling something what it is," Ford replied evenly. "You've spent the last 10 minutes trying to tear me down with loaded questions, false premises, and anonymous accusations. In any other context, people would recognize that for exactly what it is." Kimmel was clearly losing control of the situation now, and his desperation was starting to show. "Look, maybe we got off on the wrong foot here. Let's talk about something else. Your new project, maybe we can discuss that. But Ford wasn't about to let him off the hook that easily. No, I think we should finish what you started. You wanted to talk about my reputation in the industry? Let's really talk about it. Let's talk about how I've worked with the same directors multiple times because they respect my professionalism. Let's talk about how many of my co-stars have publicly praised working with me. Let's talk about my actual track record instead of your anonymous sources. I mean, that's great and all, Kimmel stammered, clearly trying to regain his footing. But everyone knows Hollywood people say nice things about each other in public regardless of what they really think. Ford smiled then, but it wasn't a friendly expression. So now you're saying that everyone in Hollywood is lying when they say positive things about their colleagues? That's an interesting theory. Tell me, does that apply to the people who say nice things about you too? The camera caught Kimmel's Adam's apple bob as he swallowed hard. He was being systematically dismantled by a master, and everyone in the studio could see it happening in real time. This is getting a little philosophical for a late-night talk show, don't you think? Kimmel tried to deflect with a nervous laugh. Actually, I think it's getting exactly as serious as it needs to be, Ford replied. You wanted to have a real conversation about Hollywood and the industry? Well, here we are. Let's talk about integrity. Let's talk about treating people with basic respect. Let's talk about the difference between being a professional and being a parasite who feeds off of manufactured drama. The word parasite landed like a physical blow. Kimmel's face went white, then red again, and his hands were visibly shaking. Now wait just a minute. No, you wait, Ford interrupted, his voice still calm but carrying unmistakable authority. You've had your turn to talk. You've asked your gotcha questions and made your little insinuations. Now I'm going to tell you something about this industry that maybe nobody's had the courage to say to your face before. The studio was so quiet you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Every camera was focused on Ford, who looked like he was just getting started while Kimmel appeared to be shrinking into his chair. This business is built on relationships, Ford continued. Trust, mutual respect, professionalism. When you invite someone onto your show, you're entering into a relationship with them, even if it's just for 20 minutes. They're trusting you to treat them fairly, to give them a platform to share their work, to engage in genuine conversation. When you violate that trust for cheap entertainment, you're not just hurting that one person. You're damaging the whole ecosystem. Kimmel opened his mouth to respond, but Ford held up a hand to stop him. I'm not finished, Ford said. You asked about my reputation in the industry. Well, here's something for you to consider. My reputation is built on 40-plus years of showing up, doing the work, treating my colleagues with respect, and delivering what I promise. What's your reputation built on? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like it's built on gotcha moments and manufactured conflicts designed to go viral on social media. The host was clearly struggling now, sweat visible on his forehead under the studio lights. Harrison, I think you're taking this way too seriously. It's just television. It's supposed to be fun. Fun, Ford repeated, and his tone suggested he found the word distasteful. Is it fun for the guest who comes here expecting a professional interview and instead gets ambushed? Is it fun for the audience who came here to be entertained, not to watch someone get torn down for sport? Or is it just fun for you? Kimmel's face was a mask of barely controlled panic now, but instead of backing down or apologizing, he made the fatal mistake that would seal his fate for the evening. His ego, wounded by Ford's systematic destruction of his tactics, pushed him to make one last desperate attempt to regain control. You know what, Harrison? Kimmel said, his voice rising with false bravado. Maybe the problem isn't me asking tough questions. Maybe the problem is that you can't handle being challenged anymore. Maybe you've been surrounded by yes men for so long that you've forgotten what real conversation looks like. The studio went dead silent. Ford stared at Kimmel for what felt like an eternity, and when he finally spoke, his voice was so quiet, that everyone had to strain to hear him. "Real conversation," Ford said slowly, each word precisely measured. "You think what you've been doing here tonight qualifies as real conversation? Let me tell you what real conversation looks like. Real conversation involves two people who respect each other enough to engage honestly. Real conversation doesn't involve ambushing someone with anonymous gossip and loaded questions designed to make them look bad." Kimmel, perhaps sensing he had pushed too far but unable to stop himself, doubled down. "Oh, come on, don't be so precious about it. This is how interviews work in the real world. Not everyone's going to throw you softball questions and kiss your ring." That was it. Ford's expression went completely cold, and everyone in the studio could feel the temperature drop. When he spoke again, his voice carried the full weight of his decades in Hollywood, and every word cut like a blade. "Kiss my ring?" Ford repeated, and there was genuine disgust in his voice now. "Is that what you think this is about? You think I came here expecting to be worshipped? Let me explain something to you about respect, since you clearly don't understand the concept. Respect isn't about throwing softball questions or kissing anyone's ring. Respect is about basic human decency. It's about treating your guests like human beings instead of targets for your amusement." Kimmel's production team was now frantically signaling from behind the cameras, trying to get their host to wrap up the interview, but Kimmel seemed oblivious to everything except his collapsing ego. "Look, if you can't handle a little heat, maybe—" "You shouldn't have come on the show," Kimmel snapped, his mask finally slipping completely. "I mean, what did you expect? A puff piece? A commercial for your movie?" Ford stood up slowly, and the simple action somehow carried more menace than any angry outburst could have. "What I expected," he said, looking down at Kimmel with something approaching pity, "was professionalism. What I expected was to be treated like a human being rather than a punching bag for your insecurities." "My insecurities?" Kimmel sputtered, jumping to his feet as well. "What's that supposed to mean?" Ford looked at him for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was almost conversational, which somehow made his words even more devastating. "It means that this whole performance tonight, this desperate attempt to tear me down, says a lot more about you than it does about me. People who are secure in themselves don't need to build themselves up by tearing others down." The audience was completely transfixed now, watching what was clearly the most dramatic moment in the show's history unfold in real time. Kimmel's face was cycling through emotions: rage, embarrassment, panic, while Ford remained perfectly calm, his 40 years of experience in high-pressure situations serving him well. "You want to know what I think?" Ford continued, his voice still dangerously quiet. "I think you invited me here tonight specifically to try to humiliate me. I think you planned this whole attack from the beginning, thinking you could make a name for yourself by taking down Harrison Ford on national television. The problem is, you forgot that respect isn't something you can fake, and credibility isn't something you can manufacture." "That's not— I never," Kimmel stammered, but Ford cut him off with a look. "Save it," Ford said. "We both know exactly what this was. The question now is whether you're going to own up to it or keep pretending this was legitimate journalism." He looked directly into the main camera then, addressing the audience both in the studio and at home. "Ladies and gentlemen, you've just witnessed a perfect example of what happens when someone mistakes cruelty for entertainment and thinks that tearing people down is the same thing as building themselves up." Kimmel made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. "Harrison, come on, sit back down. Let's finish the interview properly. We can start over." Ford turned back to him, and for a moment there was something almost like sympathy in his expression. "Jimmy, let me give you some free advice from someone who's been in this business longer than you've been alive. When you burn bridges, you don't get to decide when or how they get rebuilt. And right now, you've just burned a very big bridge in front of a very large audience." He started to walk toward the edge of the stage, but then stopped and turned back one more time. "Oh, and one more thing. Next time you want to ambush someone on your show, you might want to pick someone who doesn't have 40 years of experience dealing with people exactly like you. The studio erupted as Ford walked off the stage, some audience members applauding, others sitting in stunned silence. Kimmel stood frozen behind his desk, clearly having no idea how to recover from what had just happened. His production team was in chaos, and the cameras kept rolling, capturing every moment of his humiliation. "Well," Kimmel finally managed to say to the cameras, his voice shaky and uncertain, That was Harrison Ford, everyone. We'll be right back after this commercial break." But everyone knew there was no coming back from what they had just witnessed. In less than 20 minutes, Harrison Ford had systematically dismantled not just Jimmy Kimmel's interview tactics, but his entire credibility as a host. It was a masterclass in how experience, integrity, and genuine class could triumph over cheap tactics and manufactured controversy. The real kicker, Ford never once raised his voice, never once lost his composure, and never once stooped to Kimmel's level. He had won the confrontation by simply being better than his opponent in every way that mattered. And everyone watching knew it. So there. You have it. The night Jimmy Kimmel learned that some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. What do you think? Was Harrison Ford right to walk off, or should he have stayed and tried to work things out? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this one.